The rest of the world tends to use education systems to, kind of break down class systems. Not in Australia. We use it to build it, create it. My name's Jane Caro, and my title is novelist, writer, documentary maker, and I do like occasionally to say troublemaker. I'm self-employed, so I can call myself whatever I like. And I have written an article in the Saturday paper appearing this coming Saturday about the really dire state that public schools and public education in general has found itself in at this point, post-COVID, post really 20 years of neoliberal parental choice-driven policies, which have, totally segregated our education system along social class lines, ethnic and racial lines, and religious lines as well. Well, Australia has the most privatised education system in the OECD. We are an outlier in the percentage of public funding that we give to private schools. No other country comes within cooey of the amount that we do. And the countries that do give money to private fee charging schools have reciprocal obligations in return for that money. We don't have that here. All the private schools have to do basically is obey the law and teach the curriculum. Otherwise, they take absolutely no responsibility for the compulsory education of all kids. Public schools do that alone. So what's tended to happen is, well, as I write in the article, private schools have been overfunded, publicly overfunded, for more than a decade now. Trevor Cobbold, who I quote in the article, says that private school funding has risen at 3 times the rate of public school funding over the last decade. And what people forget is that public schools, because they shoulder that responsibility for universal public education, compulsory universal education for every child, they overwhelmingly educate the most needy, rural and remote, Indigenous, refugee, non-English speaking, kids with disabilities, and of course kids from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds. And those kids are the most expensive to educate. So what we're doing is we're underfunding the system anyway, but we're underfunding it when its costs and the needs of its students are much higher than the system that we are overfunding. And so the inevitable result of that is a growing gap. According to a study by the OECD, 41% of government schools can be classified as disadvantaged in Australia. 3% of Catholic schools can be classified that way, and less than 1% of independent schools. So equity? You are kidding me. There is no equity. The middle class have, to a large extent deserted the public school system, been encouraged to by government, and that's what we've got. We've got a class system being built by our education system. The rest of the world tends to use education systems to, kind of break down class systems. Not in Australia. We use it to build it, create it. Unfortunately, I think that the public education community won the argument and the rhetoric, but they lost the actual implementation. The rot started when Julia Gillard said no school would lose $1, when there are lots of schools that, really need to lose some dollars. But what that did in the initial phase was it made the Gonski implementation way more expensive than it should have been. So that became an excuse not to do it. So it's really interesting. A Labor government made sure that private schools, because that's who she meant when no school lose $1, would hang on to their funds that they didn't need. And we penalised public schools further because it became too expensive to give them more money. Riddle me that, Batman. And so basically there's almost nothing left of the Gonski Review. Malcolm Turnbull's government tried to do what they called Gonski 2.0, which was where they said they were going to end the schools funding wars. They didn't, and I knew they weren't going to. They legislated a split where the Commonwealth government funds private schools 80%, states fund them 20%, and the reverse is true for public schools. State governments 80% to public schools, 20% to private. The problem is that no state government in Australia at the moment is funding its public schools to 80% of the school resource standard. They're all below that. And so, the Commonwealth has locked in its subsidy at 20%. Can't go any higher than that for public schools. Now, remembering that the states can't raise revenue on their own. They're spending GST money. So they're the poorer arm of government. So what we've done is we've put the poorest, the schools that teach the poorest and neediest kids at the, financial control of the neediest and poorest arm of government. And particularly in states like Tasmania and the Northern Territory, they don't have the money to meet the needs of their students because, for obvious reasons, they don't have enough of a tax base. They've got the, neediest communities across the board. So basically, we keep protecting the kids who don't need protecting and throwing the kids who desperately need our help under the bus. So, of course, our equity is going down. And more than that, our results are going down across the board. So the way we're funding schools isn't actually helping anyone. A lot of this article came out of the fact that I went to a symposium on public education at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. And so there were a lot of presentations from many people, including some of the people I mentioned in the article. And one of the things people did was give their suggestions about what might be done. And so they range from things like removing all public funding from private schools that charge fees above the average cost of educating a child in a public school. That would be one solution, to move the money around to where it's needed from where it's not needed. I do think that at some point we are going to have to do something because the problem is going to become so impossible to ignore, and we are shooting ourselves in the foot because the rest of the world is better and more equitably educating its potential future citizens, and we're not. And that will cost us, cost all of us. Wherever we send our own child to school, that will have a result for us. So something has to change. I suspect that in the next little while, one thing we might see, which would be really good, is every public school brought up at least to its school resource standard, so that at least the kids are getting the very base resources that they need to learn properly. I think that probably is doable and has to be done, because otherwise we're going to end up being a laughingstock, and we're wasting so much possible talent, because good talent doesn't just pop up in nice middle-class families that can afford or are prepared to pay school fees. So I suspect that might be where we get to. I would like to see the 80-20 split legislation repealed, because I believe that certainly for the poorer states, it really is beholden on the federal government to actually meet the needs of the very poorest of our students. Really, we really kind of pour money into schools, teaching kids who are already doing well, who are already prosperous families, who are already well-resourced, that can get rid of the ones that are hard to teach, and don't let anyone tell you they don't, they do, get rid of those students that are tough to teach. We pour resources and money into them. They're overfunded. They got more money during COVID for JobKeeper subsidies and also transition funding to compensate them for the money they might lose from Gonski, which they haven't actually lost. Public schools are now underfunded by $6.5 billion a year. This has to change. And unfortunately, we're going to have to keep playing catch up unless we relook at our model of schooling. And how are we going to make sure that we actually put the most resources behind the children who need the most help, rather than what we do now, which is ask about. And criminal, forget about the social justice, forget about the, sheer economic waste of talent. It's just an appalling waste of money. Gets us nothing, buys us nothing in return.